Today I want to talk about youth, both boys and girls. And before I do that, I just want to put out a word here about these encampments that we see in so many of the cities. If you're driving by one of these encampments and you see small children there, I want you to stop and call 911 because that child is in danger. Okay, so that's just a public service announcement I'm making right now. Very important. I know you're not going to see that very often, but if you ever do, alert the authorities right away because there's a clear danger to children there. The youth population I'm talking about are people in their teens still, under the age of 20, 21, somewhere in there. A lot of them go right down to age 14. They won't tell you that, but we see 14-year-olds, boys and girls. And this is a very important subject because they are at great risk. And the greatest risk is that if they are homeless for any length of time, the longer they're homeless, the more likely they'll become a permanent part of the homeless population. It needs to be nipped in the bud. The sooner we can help them, the sooner we can redirect them away from the streets. There's a lot of reasons why young people become homeless. We estimate that it's about 1% per year that require help from a shelter. So if you have a high school with 1,000 kids, that means over the course of a year you'll have 10 kids that'll be out of the house and that won't have a grandma or aunt or a friend from school that'll take them in. They don't have anybody that'll take them in. And it is so critical that we help that population. Now, you've got runaways, but it's not as simple as it sounds. A lot of times the runaways are running away from an abusive environment where both parents are alcoholic and the kid is being neglected and yelled at and all kinds of nasty stuff going on in the home. And then you have another group, I call them throwaways. Mother's got a new boyfriend. The boyfriend doesn't want this 16-year-old kid around and he feels unwelcomed and he's locked out of the house and he's got nowhere to go. Then you have another group which, for want of a better term, I would call adventure seekers. And quite often these are boys and they're not doing real well in school. It doesn't agree with them for some reason. They're ready to start life, but they're really not. They think they are. There's a bit of bravado involved and so forth. And then you've got the foster care graduates. These are kids that have grown up in the foster care system. And they've been shunted around. They don't feel a connection to any of the foster parents they've had. They are not of age yet, but they know that if they take off, it's a really low priority for the police to go and round them up and find them. So, they're really, I guess, absconders of care. And what happens with a lot of these kids is that they head for the city. They get on a Greyhound bus and they arrive at the bus terminal and so forth. They don't have a clue what they're up against. The cities are very dangerous places for these young people. There's people, predators, I call them, waiting at the bus stations. And they immediately recognize these kids, whether it's a boy or girl or whatever, and they groom them. And they act real nice to them and they say, hey, this is dangerous out here. You shouldn't be wandering around here. There's a coffee shop around the corner. Let me buy you a coffee and a sandwich or whatever, and I can tell you what you need to do because this is not a good thing that you're doing. And they befriend them, and they make like they're going to help them and all this kind of stuff. And they're trying to get the kids into prostitution. especially the young girls. And, you know, a young girl who's 16, but she looks 14, and put her a school uniform on her, I mean, that's top dollar on the streets. And that's why you have the predators hanging out at the bus stations, and it's a very bad thing. The boys also do this, although they're less likely to work for a pimp, but they pick it up from other boys, and they start in the sex trade as well. Again, the younger they look, the better. If they're still wearing braces, that's even better yet. That brings a top price. Most of the customers for young boys are older men. We call them chicken hawks, because that's what they are. And it's kind of ironic, because the guy, he thinks he's ripping the older guy off, charging him $80 for 5-minute whatever. And the older guy realizes that he's exploiting the young person. And so it may seem like it's a victimless situation, but it's not. These boys and girls that get involved in these activities, it's a road to destruction. And as I said in the beginning, the sooner they can be turned around from that, the better. And the best way to do it is to have youth shelters. During my time in Toronto, we set up 12 shelters for young people, averaging 25 beds each, half boys, half girls. And 3 of those shelters were right downtown Toronto, but the other 9 were spread through the suburban areas, because that's where the kids were coming from. And by having them in the suburban areas, then it increased the possibility that this kid could still go to his same high school and familiar neighborhoods and so forth. Also, it kept them away from the dangers of the downtown area. So it was very important to have these shelters. And I know there was, for example, there was one success story where one of the young boys staying at the shelter got a job at a coffee shop. And I guess he was a little bit of a go-getter, and some of them are. These are bright kids in many cases. But anyways, this young fellow said, after he worked there for a period of time, told himself, he says, you know, I could do this. And he did. His target was someday have his own coffee shop. And he did it. Started small, but over a period of few years, he had a whole chain of coffee shops called Second Cup, all through Toronto, and became quite a success story. So afterwards, he would visit the youth shelters, and he would talk to the kids, and he would say, I used to be where you are, but you have a lot of potential, you have hope, and so forth. And again, the danger for these kids is if they make choices that are lifelong. If they get AIDS, if they get addicted to very strong chemicals, pregnancies, and so forth, it's a really bad situation. And sometimes they make decisions or they get involved in situations that really damage them for life. And you know, as I was saying in my video about the older men, that when I started as the director in 1981, there were about 2,500 men that were in our shelters. I can tell you that most of those men are gone today. They're dead. I'm in my mid-70s. It's almost unheard of for these homeless men to live to my age, and I hope to live a bit longer yet. So you say, well, who replaced these men then? Yeah, it was a new crop of men, more men, and some of them started out as youth. And it's really sad that a young person makes decisions early in life that lead them down to the path so that one day they become a transient homeless person on the streets. It's very sad. And I think that the important things are to not put the young people in the adult shelters, You have to have separate shelters for the young people. Recognize that 1 out of every 100 young people will be out of the home over the course of a year, and there needs to be an intervention, an easy way of helping, redirecting. And I think of all the groups that we sheltered, this would certainly be amongst the highest priority, is to help them and get them training, get them, they're so eager to learn the computer stuff, something that I'm not familiar with. That's why I have JW doing all my computer stuff here. But one of the shelters had a whole bank of computers set up, and they were being used all day long by the kids, getting good at it. They probably didn't have one in their homes. And so it's very important. And give them a sense of accomplishment. Try to keep them in school. One of the beefs that I have about our education system is they're not training the kids for a lot of the practical jobs. You know, when I hear that industry needs more welders, that plumbers are making a good living, and all of these trades and so forth, and you got kids that are not academically inclined, but they're bright kids, and they're willing. And, you know, there's a farrier in California, and a farrier is somebody who does the care of horses' hooves, putting new shoes on, scraping them, doing all the care over the feet. This guy trains young people to become farriers, and the state gives him a stipend. They pay the cost for that, and it's a great thing. But his frustration was that the state requires that these young people have a GED, that they have their high school. And he said, they don't need algebra, they don't need history, they don't need any of this stuff to become a farrier. So they dropped out of grade 10. Big deal. They're strong, they're young, they're smart, they're willing. Why can't I train them to be farriers? There's show horses all over the country. There's race horses. There's more horses in the U.S. now than there ever was. There's a demand for farriers. It's a steady, well-paid work. I can't train these young people because they don't have their GED. This is nonsense. So this is where sometimes government policy gets a bit stupid. And I think that, countries like Germany, 60% of the kids don't go to college. They go to trade school. Makes so much sense. And we could learn from that. So anyways, that's going to be my last word on this subject. If you have comments or questions, I know that I've only scratched the surface on this topic, but I'm so willing to answer questions or respond to comments as long as they're not abusive. I don't need that at my stage in life, but I feel that the situation in our cities has gone from bad to worse. Some people might describe it as a dumpster fire almost. It's so bad, but it doesn't have to be that way. There are answers as long as there's the will to do it. I know there's the money. I heard that LA spends $80,000 a year per homeless person. What I'm talking about is half that. It can be done, it should be done, and I hope that this isn't an issue of left and right. When I was at the City of Toronto, it wasn't the left wing and the right wing that was arguing about how to do it. I mean, that may have changed, but during my time, it wasn't that way. I was getting tremendous support from both sides. And at the time that I retired, I had a budget of $150 million to do what needed to be done. And I was told, you just tell us what you need. You're doing a good job. We're keeping people off the streets. That's what's important. And it's important for the homeless as much as it is for those who have their homes and businesses downtown. So I'll leave it at that for today.